to see everybody here. It's nice to be able to get to see old friends and colleagues again.
Our residents as well. You know, what we got.
30 stories worth of fire hose seems like a lot, doesn't it?
Anybody wants to talk to Tom or I about what that looks like, the fire stopping elements we're putting in buildings.
That's another sort of energy sustainable technology that sort of is great but works against us. It also burns the grass in my yard.
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon. As Michael said, I was the Assistant Chief of the Fire Department and the Fire Marshal for Baltimore City, so I was the fire official, and I was the Chief Building Official for the City of Rockville. So I come at this from both perspectives, and that'll be relevant a little later in the talk. The one thing that threw me this morning is when the speakers were talking about timber construction, it took me a little while to gather that it wasn't heavy timber, that it was lightweight wood or stick built, as we call it. If you say timber construction in the States, they think you're referring to either heavy timber or mass timber, which would be like cross-laminated timber slabs of big dimensions. So I learned something this morning, that George Bernard Shaw was correct. The Americans and the English are two people separated by a common language. So that's who I am. So we're just going to talk about the American experience with construction fires. They have been a problem over the years. I'm the administrator of the Construction Fire Safety Coalition, which anybody can join. There's template documents on there. There's model policies. It's really a place where you can gather information. You can provide information. It's sort of an information sharing center. We also have a Facebook page. You can ask questions in real time. But this is the nature of the fire problem in the U.S. So you can see here, they average 3,840 fires under, this is new construction every year, and another 2,500 under major renovation. This is a study conducted by NFPA. It came out in February of 2020. Now, these sound like big numbers, and they are, but they really represent about 2% of structure fires in America. The American fire problem is still single-family homes, 1 and 2 family, single-family homes. I'm not saying that it isn't a problem. I'm just trying to put the problem in perspective. But the one problem with these fires is they're long in duration. So news crews can come and set up. They're telegenic. They're big in scale. They bring a lot of negative publicity to your jurisdiction, and they do a disproportionate amount of economic damage. Now, an interesting part of this, of the construction fire safety sort of issue, is that the insurance companies are stakeholders in this. Water damage, not from flooding, makes up 1/3 of all insurance losses in America. Fire makes up 1/12, but the claims are 3 times as big. So the insurance industry, I've been trying to get them engaged in this. I actually attended a conference and sat on a panel discussion for the insurance industry back in Chicago earlier in the year. So I'm going to just outline a couple significant fires and things to be learned from them. This was Bound Brook, New Jersey, which is only 20 minutes outside of Manhattan. It's on a major rail line. Let's see, is there a laser pointer on here? Anyway, see, this is a picture I took after the fire. This is downtown Bound Brook the day after the fire. It actually was a podium-style construction here. It was 4 stories of wood frame over top of a 2-story cast-in-place podium. You see, this thing is giving me grief. So you see another stair tower right there, CMU Tower. That's a different construction site. What happened with this fire was a person pushed aside a weighted base fence that the chief in that town said it was flimsy, went up to the first floor, which was the 3rd floor, first floor of wood, just happened to be a scrap room. They didn't even have a dumpster. They put all their scrap in one of the units. He had all the fuel he needed, and he set a fire. They caught him about 3 hours later because he was a really smart criminal. He put on Facebook he was going to make downtown Bound Brook light up. So not a criminal genius. But the radiant heat was so bad that it jumped that street, that's a big wide street, and caught that other construction site on fire. It destroyed surrounding buildings. They had to cut power to downtown Bound Brook for a day. The commuter rail line going into Manhattan was shut down. And this just goes showing the growing need in America for better perimeter security on these sites. This is a fire that happened in Fairfax, Virginia, which is a suburb of DC. This was a big place under construction. On a Friday, they had a cleanup crew there. They had a combustible garbage chute, plastic, and someone dropped a cigarette into the plastic garbage chute that was filled with junk, and excess junk backed up into the chute, caught it on fire. It burned up into the building, did $55 million worth of damage. I actually have video at the end of this presentation of what the first arriving unit saw. But I look in terms of construction fire safety, in terms of this three-legged stool. You need fire department access, you need water supply, and you need early notification. You need all three or the stool cannot stand. So what good is fire department access if you don't have any sufficient water supply? What good is water supply if by the time you get there, the place is already fully involved? You need all three of those principles, and you'll see that reflected in the American codes. Now, it's no surprise construction sites are hazardous. There's a lot of moving parts. You have a bunch of fuel sources, combustible, trash, building materials, hazmats, that kind of thing. Now, this is a type 1 building, right? This is non-combustible building, nothing to burn here, correct, right? No problem. This is the back of that same building. I was giving a presentation in Columbus, Ohio. They were renovating the Hilton Tower. It's a high-rise, like 20 stories. And the whole back of the building is nothing but 2x4s and plywood or OSB, all the way up the entire height of that building. And in addition to that, even concrete buildings that don't have that still have wooden forms, they have vinyl tub kits, they have packaging materials. There was a big fire in Brooklyn, New York earlier in this year that was a type 1 building. But in addition to all that fuel, you also have all of these sources of ignition. Now, that same building, when I was in Columbus, Ohio, I'm coming back from dinner, and I see this going on. Okay, this is a guy welding, doing hot work, has no light that he's working by. There's no fire watch, and you can even see the slag bounce off the side of the building. This is right around the corner from that big, long part of the building where all the plywood was, right there. Every once in a while, he would stop welding, and he'd look around with a flashlight and then go right back to welding. So these are the kind of bad practices that are out there. And this is how construction fire starts. Fortunately, it didn't on this one, but doesn't mean it couldn't have. Sorry for the grainy material. I was coming back from dinner and just filmed it with my cell phone. So according to the NFPA report, these are your major causes of fires in new construction. Cooking, number one, electrical, heating equipment, all the things that you would expect. There's no real surprises here. But you have to look behind those numbers, because if you just look at the percentages, you think, wow, we really got to do something about cooking. Well, yeah, cooking is the leading cause, but they only make up about 2% of the property loss. Now, electrical fires and intentionally set fires make up roughly about 27% of the fire causes, but they do about 75% of the loss, the property loss in the United States. So really, electrical fires and intentionally set fires are the places where you want to focus if you're building in the States. We also know they occur more frequently in colder months for obvious reasons. Unattended heaters, burn barrels, that kind of thing. We also know the peak times are between 1,600 and 2,000 hours, and 12% occur between midnight and 4, but they occur for 31% of the property damage. So it's off-peak hours. It's when nobody's there. That's why these fires rarely kill people, because nobody's there to catch them in the incipient state. They usually don't catch them until they're already out of control. These are the fire causes during major renovations. Electrical becomes the number one cause, then heating equipment, then intentionally set fires, and the others. But a lot of fire officials and firefighters don't realize that there's actually codes that govern these construction site fires, or construction sites rather. We have Chapter 33 of the International Fire Code. We have Chapter 16 of NFPA 1. There's two major fire codes in the United States, model codes. the IFC and NFPA 1, and they both reference sort of the granddaddy of construction fire safety codes, which is NFPA 241. And it's not a new standard. It's been around since 1933 is when it was adopted. It's also not highly technical. The subject work began in the 30s. It was completed in a complete rewrite in 86, and then they did certain things with it along the way. But here we have a team of, it seems like over here the insurance industry is more involved in construction fire safety than in America. And the authority having jurisdictions, they have several responsibilities. One, the building department oversees the building, the plans review, that kind of thing. The Fire Prevention Bureau adopts the fire code provisions, and then local firehouses are supposed to go by and talk about pre-planning, tactics, strategies, access, and all that stuff. But here's the problem, okay? Building inspectors, their traditional role has been review approved plans, ensure that the construction matches the as-built, apply the building and MEP codes. It views the fire code and fire safety, the responsibility of the fire inspector. So traditionally, they've always never really enforced any fire code provisions, and that's where all of these codes are parked. And they're on the scene more than anybody. Now, for fire inspectors, they inspect finished or nearly finished buildings. The fire code is a maintenance code. It's not a building code. They're rarely on construction sites. They usually will do pump tests or they'll do hydros on the sprinkler system. They view the building inspector as the one responsible. So on one side, you have the building inspector going, that's fire code, that's not us, that's fire inspector. And then you have the fire inspectors going, that's not us, we don't go inspect things while they're being built. That's the building inspector. So in this gap, which I call the responsibility gap, there is where all these lie. It's not out of bad motives. It's the culture they were hired and trained and grew up in. They're not being lazy. It's just they've never had to do it before. So, and staffing is also an issue. And one of the reasons staffing is an issue, it's the way inspections are triggered. And it's probably here too, but in the United States, inspections are triggered two ways. They're either permit-driven or they're complaint-driven. And if they're permit-driven, there's no permit for construction sites other than the building permit. There's no construction fire safety permit. So the fire department says, we don't have a permit to even send anybody out there. With building departments, they're just overworked, and it's easy to get focused in on just, okay, here's the plans, let me look and see how it's built. So it's not anybody trying to, but it's in this gap of enforcement is where all these bad practices, like the guy welding at night with no spotter or anything. Now, I'm not going to read all my slides, but this one I am going to read. It says, a fire safety program shall be included in all construction, alteration, or demolition contracts, and the right of the owner to administer and enforce this program shall be established even if the building is entirely under the jurisdiction of the contractor. Do you know how many fire officials in America don't realize it? They don't realize this plan is required. And it says for all, it doesn't say big ones only. In theory, if John Q. Public was going to put a deck on his home, he should have a fire safety plan. It wouldn't be elaborate, but it would have to have something in writing that, to account for if a fire would occur. And these are the responsibilities of the program manager. Every construction site, if the owner isn't going to be the fire prevention program manager, then he has to designate someone to do it. And these are their responsibilities. Plan authorized impairments. Look at the guard service, responsible for the guard service, hot work. And an important one, a weekly self-inspection. There's no way we can get an inspector on the scene of a construction site once a week to inspect. It's just feasibly impossible. In America, when they go to cut back the fire department, they cut back the Fire Prevention Bureau because they don't have to close a firehouse. They cut back firefighters. That's politically I wouldn't say not feasible, but it's politically inconvenient, where you could cut a third of all fire inspectors and the public wouldn't even know about it. So every every construction site is supposed to have a fire safety program, sort of a site safety plan. And I heard a little bit of this earlier, and you're going to see common themes with it. It should be good housekeeping. It should address on-site security, training of employees, rapid communication. Now, people, I think one mistake the American Fire Service makes when it comes to construction fire safety is they overestimate the fire safety literacy of the public. There's been a cultural change in the workforce in America and probably other places, but in America where we have a lot of foreign-born workers who grew up in places where you didn't call 911 if there was a problem. You didn't call the government if there was a problem. They don't have that back. When I was a kid, I got taught from this age up that you call 911 if there's a problem. And you go to places where, people come from places where the government will cause more problems for you if you call them.
Book your tickets now for the 8th International Tall Building High-Rise Fire Safety Conference, taking place alongside FDIC in Indianapolis, US, on the 15th to the 17th of April 2024. 3 days of world-class speaker presentations, debates and networking. Book your tickets via the website www.tallbuildingfiresafety.com. Early bird discount tickets will be available. The Tall and High-Rise Building Fire Safety Management course is ideal for anyone who has responsibility for fire safety management in tall and high-rise buildings. It is a 5-day intensive course with world-class instructors. You can get full details of the course on our website www.tallbuildingfiresafety.com.
So the fire service doesn't take that into account, and this has to be trained into it. And the prime example was in Edgewater, New Jersey. There was folks that were doing unpermitted hot work in a wall cavity, and they heard crackling. So did they call 911? No, they went to lunch. And then they get back from lunch, and they smell smoke. So they got to call 911, right? Nope, called their boss. The way that the fire service got informed of the fire was it burned in an interstitial space until it burned through a plastic sprinkler pipe, and the water flow alarm sounded, and that's how the fire department realized it. And by the time the fire department got there, it was game over. 90 minutes into this thing. They could have probably put it out with an extinguisher. But that's the thing we have to keep it. I should also consider special hazards. An example would be when I was chief building inspector in Prince George's County, we had a power plant being built. And I had never been involved in a power plant being built. And apparently every power plant has a turbine, they have a switch yard and all this stuff. Well, that switch yard is energized, and you cannot enter it when it's energized. And they had outbuildings that could have caught fire. So they had to come up with a plan on how to de-energize that switch yard so firefighters could go in and fight the fire. And it wasn't as easy as switching a switch, flipping a switch, because that sent power. A switch yard is like a traffic cop sending power to different areas. And it powered DC, it powered Southern Maryland and Central Maryland, and you just can't shut them down without warning. So these are some other things. And this is right out of NFPA 241 that's required. Fire prevention plan should include organizational structure and responsibilities. Who do we go to if we have a problem? Name and contact phone number for the persons. You don't want the first fire service contact with the building, with the builders or developer owner to be 3 o'clock in the morning on a 2-alarm fire. Fire safety training for employees. Now, risk assessments and FPE reports, I would say, yeah, to complex structures. If I'm putting an addition on my home, I don't think I need higher FPE for that one, but that's what it says. And just general emergency notification, evacuation, that kind of thing. These are just more, and these are all the usual suspects. If you put the list of NFPA's common causes of fires on a construction site and you lay it next to the fire safety plan, they're nearly identical. Separation from buildings. Now, I don't know over here, but especially in the western United States, urban wildland interface has been a big deal. The wildfires in the U.S. West and Southwest have been terrible. So that has to be considered in the fire plan as well. You need to cut the brush back and do other things to harden the surface. Now, here's some key requirements for NFPA 241. The guard service, okay? It used to be guard service when required by the AHJ, security fence where required by the AHJ. So the default setting was you don't need these provisions unless we tell you you need them. Well, City of Los Angeles and some code proposals moving forward are changing the default setting, saying that you need them unless we tell you you don't. Site security, you should have a site security plan within the overall plan based on personal observations, log books, video technologies, and the guard service must be trained. Like they say, training and use of extinguishers is one. Now, that's double-edged sword extinguishers. There was a big fire in College Park, Maryland, where we found 12 expended extinguishers at the point of origin. Lost the whole place. But I found 12 expended extinguishers at the area of origin. So they told me instead of calling 911, they tried to put it out with an extinguisher. But they weren't trained to know if you can't put it out with one, you're not going to put it out with 12. So they delayed notification. They always put up a fence after the fire, okay? Unless they have to, they don't put the fence up. This was a fire in Long Neck, Delaware. I went there to see what happened. It's a garden apartment with a tree line behind it. The fire marshal told me that he thought folks came out of the tree line and they went in the back and started a fire. Now, we don't know if that fire was to keep warm because they were homeless, if they were doing drugs. Believe it or not, copper theft is a big deal in that area of the country where they'll go in, they'll steal copper wire, they'll burn the insulation off the wire and then scrap the copper. They don't know if that went on. But this area of Delaware was the opioid addiction capital of Sussex County, Delaware. So actually there are, I don't know if any of you have heard of Avalon Bay. They're a pretty big builder. They build outside the United States as well. They actually go to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control's opioid addiction map. It maps the worst areas, and they base their site security on that map and other factors, but that map it plays a big part in it. Now, housekeeping. Now, you can have all the rules in the world, but if you don't enforce them, housekeeping can go sideways very quickly because construction managers don't get bonuses on keeping a clean construction site. They get it for ending early, completing the job under time, under budget, that kind of thing. So one thing that can be neglected is housekeeping because you're not building anything. Like the scrap room in Bound Brook, New Jersey, I told you back. There should be a scrap room, I had a house that I was remodeling, my own house in South Baltimore, and I pulled down some of the ductwork, and I found a KFC and a Taco Bell bag in there. And I didn't put it there. The person who did the renovations before me were eating lunch, and they just shoved it into the ductwork. Nobody will see it. And that was just a row house in South Baltimore. Imagine a big construction site where you have 30 minutes for lunch. You really think you're going to walk around looking for a trash can? Shove it in an interstitial space, which is or a shaft, which coincidentally is also where people shove cigarettes when they're not supposed to be smoking. NFPA 241, you're supposed to clear all your processed waste or refuse daily. You're supposed to keep the areas free from accumulation of packing materials and provide metal bins and dumpsters for combustible waste disposal. You want to make storage places accessible to firefighters. I heard that theme this morning. If a sprinkler system is installed, all materials should be stacked, not to impede it. It's about last war story, swear to God. We had a hotel that was going up in Prince George County, Maryland. We had inspected the basement. It was fine, locked it off. We went back to do other parts of the building, had to go back to the basement for some reason, and there were 500 mattresses in the basement being stored, floor to ceiling. And we were like, what are these doing here? Well, we didn't have any place to put them. They got delivered early. They're for the rooms. You can't store them here, so we had to get sea containers to store these outside. But the person wasn't even thinking. In the basement, 500 mattresses would have taken down that building. Now, I heard people talk about hot work. Yep, hot work is a big deal. They recommend you implement a permit system, not a permit that the regulators issue. It's like an internal permitting system to hold the persons doing hot work accountable. It basically says, if I'm the GC, general contractor, you come to me and say, and you're a sub, I'm going to do welding of stairs in stairwell B, floor level 5, and it's from this time to this time. That way, that person can make sure the area is free of debris, make sure there's a fire watch, and then go back and see if there's any hot spots. And this is just the inner workings of that. So the fire watch, this is always a tough one because construction managers hate people standing around doing nothing. And in 241, it says you can have no other duties. You're supposed to be standing there watching the person weld or do hot work to see where that slag goes, where those sparks go, and make sure it doesn't ignite anything. But construction managers, like I said, they hate seeing people just standing around. So they have the person sweeping or doing something else and kind of keep an eye. That's not what the code says. It's not what they're supposed to be doing. And it's supposed to be for up to a 1 hour after completion of hot work. You're supposed to stay there. And do you really think they stay there? I mean, the guy on the video earlier, he didn't even have a fire watch. And that was the middle of the night. Torch-applied roof systems, it's 2 hours because torch-applied roof systems have been a problem. And it's the way they install them that's the problem. They have the rubber on big rolls, and you're supposed to roll a piece out, cut it, torch it, and then apply it. But that takes too long. So they keep the roll on the deck, and they just torch right as the roll beats the deck and just keep rolling it out. It's a lot quicker. The problem is, if there's some combustible debris underneath of that rubber, and it gets any kind of air, and it smolders, then you're coming back at 3 in the morning for a roof fire, which has happened many times. These are all of the requirements for branch circuits. They all have to originate out of one approved panel. This is for temporary wiring, by the way. Temporary wiring, not permanent wiring. And the reason being is that the fire service has to put a fire out. They want one place to shut off the electric, just like in your home. So there's not multiple places to go to. They don't want anything energized. All the conductors have to be overcurrent protected. They need to have fuses or breakers. That even temporary wiring has to still not exceed levels exceeding 10 feet to be supported by hangers. See, the problem is like, I think too many people, at least in the United States, think because it's temporary wiring, because it's a construction site, it's not a permanent site, that these people get a free pass just to have it any way they want. They don't realize that these are regulations, and regulations to keep firefighters and workers safe. You're supposed to, if there's a damaged cord, they're supposed to throw it away. Some of these cords are $80, so they take electrical tape and tape them up. These are just some of the requirements for temporary lighting. Now, I actually took this picture. I was on the scene of a construction fire that occurred in the roof. Okay? Now, that Romex you see coming out of that outlet is not originating from a circuit board. It's originating from that outlet. And then on the other picture, you see all those open splices. They're supposed to be in a junction box, and the thing is not, it's being supported by its own weight. It's not even being supported like we just said. And this was on a site that had a fire, a bad fire, burned a roof off a place. Now, smoking, there's two schools of thought. You either allow it and regulate it, or you don't allow it. I'm of the mindset that you allow it and regulate it because, I'm sorry for any smokers in here, a lot of smokers are relentless. They're going to do it anyway. And if you don't regulate it, they're going to do it in a place you don't want, and they're going to, and you're not going to like it. And in this pic, I couldn't get both in the same pictures. There's no smoking sign, and then right under the sign is a cigarette butt and an empty pack of cigarettes, right under the no smoking sign. And this was at a tall mass timber project in Milwaukee. Now, cooking, as I said, the culture of the workforce has changed. More of the workers want to eat on site. Either hibachis or hot plates. It's cheaper, it's easier. So it's probably better to keep a designated area and have people and cook in those areas than anywhere they want throughout the building. But like I said, even though the cooking fires cause relatively minor damage, they do account for a third of the civilian injuries because it's usually somebody there attending the cooking that usually gets burned. Heating equipment, they're never supposed to go unattended. They're supposed to be secured so they can't be knocked over, even though they have proximity switches where they're supposed to turn off. A lot of times they don't, and you're supposed to regularly inspect those. Now, with passive systems, I heard someone talk about compartmentalization, That's an important part to stop fire spread. It's an important part of passive fire protection. But in these buildings, they're wide open. The last thing they usually do is the gypboard and the finish work because they don't want to get all dinged up by other equipment. So they don't want to put fire doors in there because they know their workers, when their arms are full, are going to be kicking the doors. So that's usually, you can't depend on that. And that's one of the reasons there's such rapid fire spread with these properties. This is the other thing is, there's regulations on how to store hazmats, hazard flammable materials, gases. But once again, regulators think, oh, well, it's only temporary, so they get a free pass. This is an actual picture in a building that caught fire. That's a can of mineral spirits. They lose the cap, so what do? They stick a napkin and a rubber glove in there, essentially creating a wick, and it's on an OSB table next to a cardboard box. So, I mean, it's just these kind of habits. There's so many unforced errors. Every one of these construction fires I've been to, they could have and should have been prevented. There's no such thing as an accident because it's just bad practices, lazy practices. Now, I told you about the garbage chutes. If it's combustible, it has to be outside the building envelope, and you're supposed to have a recessed head at the top of it, recessed sprinkler head, supplied by a 3/4-inch hose. Doesn't have to be a fire hose, it could be just a rubber hose, but it has to be 3/4. The fire in Fairfax that I'm going to show you the video for didn't have any of that. And these are just, built-in fire protection, fire resistance walls, these kind of things. They're not effective till they're complete. And at the last speaker, I think, told everybody they're never complete to the end, and he's right. New provision for a fire command post has to be outside. There's a new key box provision where you have to put a key box outside if you're going to lock your construction site up so the fire department can gain access. Now, with exterior, you have to have at least 20 feet of unobstructed width to within 150 feet of all your exterior walls where practicable. And there's 13.5 feet of unobstructed height. And the problem is they always put in the curb and gutter, but then they leave the road unfinished because they don't want their nice new road to get torn up by construction vehicles. So a lot of times they can get away with putting crush and run down and stuff like that. Had a friend of mine who's a fire marshal, West Des Moines, Iowa. A weekend, the Friday before the Monday, they were going to cement it. He let them pull up all their crush and run. It rained all weekend. They had a fire, and they couldn't get within 1,000 feet of the place because all their vehicles sank down in mud. Access stairs, they have to go up as the building goes up, but they need one. They need one stair to go up as the building goes up. Hydrants have to be unobstructed. Now, standpipes, we don't require wet standpipes on construction sites. We just require that it goes up with the building. Once the building hits 40 feet, then the standpipe has to go up and has to be within one floor of the highest floor of active construction. And you have to have hose outlet on every floor. And now the code doesn't really give any guidance on water supply on the site. They just say that, an adequate water supply, but they don't give you any fire flows. Now, these are some new provisions in NFPA 2019. It adds definitions, guard service. Most importantly, they added tall mass timber building construction requirements to protect it during construction. So you can't have mass timber building construction codes without defining cross-laminated timber. This is just the electrical service disconnecting means requirement that I saw that I talked about earlier. Guard service requirement. So if it's combustible construction over 40 feet, you have to have a guard service. You don't have a choice. And it has to be 24, but it doesn't have to be 24/7. It only has to be when the crews aren't there. I talked about the key box requirements. They asked for a fire exposure analysis for tall mass timber buildings. That's just a risk assessment. And that's what FPE will tell you what you have to do. Guard service is required for tall mass timber buildings and a minimum high 6-foot fence. Okay, this is the video I wanted to get you to.
Hey, Chief.
This is the first arriving unit in that fire in Fairfax. Okay, they pull up. They pull up. You can see where the combustible garbage chute was. On that green board, you can see where it's scorched. Fire's coming out of 2 windows only, 1 unit, no problem, right? Well, will go in and knock that fire. And that's exactly what the fire department did. They got lines of service and went in. And this was the same building 8 minutes later. They had to pull out. And nobody got hurt, thank God. That's just how fast these things move. Now, New Jersey has played around with the idea that if you have a fire protective barrier, or fire rated barrier or wall, that you have to complete it fully before you can move on. Because this thing, it's topped out and all of its exterior sheathing was in place, but the interior chipboard wasn't. And that's why the fire just walked right around that building. It was a U-shaped building. It's like a court in the middle. So I got in under 45 minutes. I want to be respectful of your time, so I hope you have some good questions for me. I sorry I raced through this. I wanted to get all of it in. I didn't feel like cutting the slide deck back too much. I just wanted to move quick, and you'll remember more of it than you probably will think you remember.
So thanks, Ray.
Thank you.
Book your tickets now for the 8th International Tall Building High-Rise Fire Safety Conference, taking place alongside FDIC in Indianapolis, US, on the 15th to the 17th of April 2024. 3 days of world-class speaker presentations, debates and networking. Book your tickets via the website www.tallbuildingfiresafety.com. Early bird discount tickets will be available. The Tall and High-Rise Building Fire Safety Management course is ideal for anyone who has responsibility for fire safety management in tall and high-rise buildings. It is a 5-day intensive course with world-class instructors. You can get full details of the course on our website www.tallbuildingfiresafety.com.